Well, it's September 2008, and a man appears at the doorstep of this narrator, the narrator of In the Light of What We Know. And this man at the door he's haggard, he's gaunt, he looks like a destitute person. And it takes a few moments for the narrator to recognize him, that this is actually an old college friend who disappeared some years ago. And that's the beginning of the story. And what we witness over the course of the novel, but over the course of several months, is the story that this man has to tell the narrator, and also that the story that the narrator has to tell the reader. So it's the story of their two lives, these men who are divided by class. They come from completely different class backgrounds and who have had interesting lives, especially the vagrant, the man who appeared at the door. It's a grand story. It's a story of the financial crisis, the war in Afghanistan, and it's also an inquiry into epistemology and the world around us and what we can rely on that we think we know, but actually is unstable. You know, one of the things that bothered me, that has been bothering me for not just the last few years preceding writing this novel, but for most of my life, is how people seem to be so sure of things without really the basis for that kind of certainty. You know, recently we had so much certainty, everybody, public policy, everybody seemed to be so sure about how to conduct the war on terror. People were very sure about weapons of mass destruction being present in Iraq. There was so much certainty, and there still is. In the political sphere, certainty and a conviction of certainty is often mistaken for wisdom. And I have always found that troubling. Why do we human beings seem to be drawn to people who are able to give us not a convincing account of the world, but are able to deliver their confidence? Why are we not capable of living with uncertainty? Why are we not capable of accepting that this is all an experiment, and that our lives, each of them, each life is an experiment? And so that is, that's a theme of the novel, but it's not I explore it through the lives. I'm interested in abstract ideas, but only when those abstract ideas meet the human life. I have friends who are academics. Now, I'm writing in a tradition of biographic fiction, autobiographic fiction, and this is an old tradition. It was for a long time a dominant tradition in literary fiction. So it goes back to Joseph Conrad, and the two main characters of my novel. I think it's fair to say that although one of them appears to be more biographically related to me, they're both, in a sense, projections of me. Even the one who's from a very upper-class background, an elite background, what I've experienced in my life is this transition this crossing from one class to another. And that crossing of class divide has been very difficult for me. It's been very difficult for a lot of people who've crossed that divide. Many of the letters I get are from people who have crossed that divide. And I was interested in exploring that. It's an unlikely friendship. It's a friendship that was forged at college, in college, at university. And you can sense the narrator is, he's not as smart as Zafar. And he sees in Zafar a heroic life. He mentions this. And so they have a difference of personality as well. There's a because of the comfort and ease, I mean, at a very crude level, you could say that because of the comfort and ease that the narrator has experienced early in life, he's unable to take risks. He's not a risk taker, and yet he worked in finance, and he took risks where actually the people who, he took these asymmetric risks where if there was a benefit, again, he got it, and if there was suffering, other people would endure that suffering. So his life has been one in which there hasn't been any risk taking, whereas Zafar's has been all about risk. There's always something, there's a potential cost in everything that he's done. And shame is a feature of this novel. Shame and and the shame that someone who is at the edge of that boundary between classes feels, because it's a frontward facing shame and a backward facing shame. You're ashamed of where you've come from when you're standing in relation to the people you're joining, but you're also ashamed of where you're going when you're standing in relation to the people you're leaving behind. And it's shame because at root you feel disloyal in one direction, and in the other direction, there's disloyalty in both directions. You're always in a state of turning your back on someone, and it's very difficult. This is an extraordinary moment in European history. We see the question of migration at the fore of the news. And when I see these stories and read these stories, there are many ways to, there's a political dimension, there's also a human dimension, and there are actually many human dimensions. One of the stories I see in them is the fact that these are people who will bring with them, it's a difficult thing to say actually, but they bring with them the prospect of internal family ruptures of the kind that I knew growing up, and exile is full of, there's a romance associated with it. In fact, the very word exile is often used in romantic sense. We talk about refugees when we're talking about grubby things, and camps with no sanitation. But we talk about exiles when we're talking about someone who has, he's sitting in a library and looking at archives. So even language has that. But there is, I am interested in alienation, not even belonging. I'm interested in alienation, and one of the things that we tend not to recognize is that people can be exiled within their own countries. They're alienated they're simply alienated because they no longer have access to power, or they might never have had access to power, but they become aware that this is not, this country is not their own, because they don't have power. And so my novel, I am exploring class rather than race. There is race as well, but I'm very much exploring class divide. That's one of the reasons why the two main characters are of similar class, because I didn't want the attention to focus on racial difference. And by making them both come from the same race, whatever that race is, you magnify the class difference between. There are duties that a writer can assume for herself if she wants to, right? And there is certain kind of fiction where if the writer is aspiring to write a certain kind of novel, then the duty to be honest is very relevant. And when I write, not because I'm writing for the reader, but because I've been writing for 20 years for myself, and because it's a place of safety and a place of, it's a place of mental it's something I've done for 20 years for mental health reasons. Because of that, it doesn't work if I'm not honest. The other thing is aesthetics. It's really hard to find beauty in the world, and we need it. We just need it. As animals, we need it. We seem to have, the first time we ever noticed that we could scratch the wall in a cave, we didn't stop doing it. We decided we were going to make something of those scratches. So there's something within us that wants to make from whatever, from the grubby stuff of everyday life, make something beautiful out of it, become coherent. It's really hard to describe what is beautiful about something, and yet we sense it. We feel it. We say, yes, that's beautiful. We look at a Dutch master painting, and there's something just amazing.